She pulled out one envelope, and within seconds the entire studio went silent. No shouting, no debates, just one woman, one document, and the kind of truth that makes even the most powerful man in America panic. What Jasmine Crockett revealed next, no one saw coming. The room fell silent the very second Jasmine Crockett reached into her leather folder and placed a thick, sealed envelope on the table during a heated live segment on CNN. The moment didn't come with flashing lights or dramatic music, just the simple, undeniable force of tension that settled like a fog over everyone in the studio. The anchor, who had just finished tossing a question about political integrity, leaned back in his chair, stunned. The panelists, former strategists, legal analysts, and long-time political observers paused mid-discussion, their eyes now fixed squarely on Crockett. She didn't rush. That wasn't her style. Wearing a calm expression and a blazer that spoke of confidence rather than aggression, Jasmine Crockett slowly slid the envelope closer to the center of the table. Her fingers tapped it twice, a rhythmic signal that something important was about to happen. "I think it's time we stop pretending," she said, her voice cutting clean through the silence. "Transparency starts at the top." There was no hesitation, no nervous laughter to fill the air. The audience, both in the studio and watching from afar, sensed something rare, the quiet before an unexpected political storm. "I came here prepared to talk policy, like always," she continued. "But what's the point of discussing policies rooted in integrity when the people behind them aren't honest themselves?" Then came the reveal. Crockett carefully opened the envelope. The sound of paper sliding against paper amplified by the studio microphones. She withdrew a stack of documents, each page printed on formal letterhead, some bearing bold stamps like "Private and Attorney Review Only." At the top of the very first page, the words "Preliminary Divorce Filing, Donald J. Trump and Melania Trump," gasps, audible ones. The host, stunned, reached forward as if to confirm what he was seeing, but stopped himself. Crockett flipped through several pages, revealing nothing too detailed at first, just enough to show that the paperwork was real. "This document," she said calmly, "was prepared during Trump's final year in office. It includes asset division, non-disclosure conditions, and terms for post-separation conduct." She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to exaggerate. The facts themselves carried all the weight necessary. What Crockett was holding wasn't just some rumor, it was a paper trail. One that painted a picture of a troubled household behind the facade of unity. One that contradicted the image Trump had carefully maintained during his time in the White House. The rest of the panel sat in stunned silence. A veteran legal analyst cleared his throat, visibly shaken. "Congresswoman, are you saying these are legitimate documents from within the Trump household, documents outlining a private divorce process?" Jasmine didn't blink. "I'm saying these are documents submitted to legal counsel, prepared by authorized representatives, and protected behind a wall of silence that was never meant to be broken." She paused, then added, "But leadership isn't about protecting your image. It's about being real with the people who gave you power." The statement wasn't dramatic, it was surgical. She wasn't looking for applause. She was holding up a mirror. While she didn't disclose full details on camera, she made it clear that the documents contained references to shared properties, prenup provisions, and heavily negotiated communication clauses. Some things, she said, should never be swept under the rug, especially when those things reveal how far someone is willing to go to protect a lie. The timing was equally powerful. It wasn't just what the documents said it was. When they were created, the dates lined up with major political events during Trump's presidency, foreign policy blunders, COVID management chaos, and post-election disputes. It suggested something most had only speculated about, that personal and political breakdowns were happening in parallel. Crockett took a breath and looked around the table. "I didn't bring this to score points. I brought it because we've all been told to sit down and shut up while power protects itself. That time is over." Her words didn't just challenge Trump. They challenged the system that allowed him and others like him to wear a public mask, while chaos raged in the shadows. By placing those papers on the table, Jasmine Crockett didn't just start a new conversation. She changed the entire tone of the room. Asterisk as Jasmine Crockett carefully laid the divorce documents on the table. The air in the studio seemed to tighten. You could feel it even through the screen. Her hands moved with precision as she flipped open the first page, revealing the bold title, Preliminary Divorce Proceedings, Donald J. Trump and Melania Nostrump. She didn't wave the papers around or sensationalize them. Instead, she let the quiet weight of the revelation speak for itself. 4 years. Rumors had swirled around the state of Donald and Melania Trump's marriage, rumors of distance, cold public appearances, and unspoken tension. But no one had ever produced anything concrete. That changed the moment Crockett held up page after page of what appeared to be genuine legal drafts. Prepared by attorneys working closely with both parties, these aren't just personal papers. Crockett began, her voice steady and resolute. These are legal drafts that contain real discussions between two high-profile individuals who happen to live in the most powerful house in the country. What caught everyone's attention immediately was not just the fact that the divorce was being discussed, it was the timing. According to the documents, the first meetings between legal teams happened in early 2020. That was during the height of the COVID-19 crisis, just months before the presidential election. The filings detailed separate living arrangements, property evaluations, and what appeared to be an early outline of a post-nuptial agreement, crafted not to dissolve the marriage immediately, but to structure a controlled, private separation. During the very months the country was looking to the White House for guidance, Crockett explained, these papers showed there were simultaneous conversations happening in private boardrooms, conversations not about national security or public health, but about real estate, prenups, and how to keep it all hidden from the American people. She turned to another page, this one referencing multiple Trump-owned properties, including Mar-a-Lago, Trump Tower, and certain lesser-known real estate holdings. One clause outlined how any transfer or division of property assets would be handled in the event the divorce went public. What made this significant was that many of these same properties were under scrutiny for financial dealings and valuations during Trump's presidency and beyond. If you're dividing assets, Crockett said, pointing directly to the paragraph in question, and those assets are tied to ongoing investigations or questionable accounting, then the personal becomes political, whether you like it or not. Another page referenced a proposed non-disclosure agreement, which included strict rules about media interviews, memoirs, and public appearances by Melania should the divorce proceed. Crockett raised an eyebrow. This kind of control over someone's voice, their story, is something we need to talk about. Because if this is happening at the top, what message are we sending to the rest of the country? Crockett made it clear that her intention was not to air dirty laundry or ridicule someone's personal life. In fact, she repeated more than once that the issue wasn't about Trump's marriage itself, it was about authenticity and honesty in leadership. You can't build your political identity on the idea of being a family man, of upholding traditional values, and then hide behind legal walls when the truth threatens that image, she said firmly. It's not about judgment, it's about accountability. What made this moment even more compelling was Crockett's refusal to speculate. She didn't claim the divorce was finalized, nor did she say whether Melania had signed the documents. Instead, she focused on the fact that such a detailed conversation even existed, and that it had been happening while the nation was in turmoil. She also hinted that the documents came from a source close to one of the law firms involved, someone who had grown uncomfortable with the secrecy and the pressure to keep things buried. That detail added another layer to the moment, the idea that people within Trump's own orbit might be ready to speak out, and yet, despite the weight of what was in front of her, Crockett remained composed. She didn't attack Trump directly, nor did she veer into personal insults. Instead, she held up the documents as a symbol not of scandal, but of what happens when private dishonesty overlaps with public duty. This is bigger than one couple, she concluded. This is about trust. If leaders expect the public to believe in them, then they have to be honest not just about policies, but about who they are when the cameras aren't rolling. The papers sat on the table, no longer hidden, no longer whispered about. In just a few pages, Crockett had peeled back a carefully maintained image and revealed something raw, complex, and deeply human. Whether or not the documents would lead to any formal fallout remained to be seen. But in that moment, one thing was certain: the curtain had been pulled back. The response was instant and explosive. While the studio sat frozen in stunned silence, word of Jasmine Crockett's shocking reveal began to ripple out. Even though the full content of the divorce documents hadn't been disclosed in detail, the sheer fact that such paperwork existed was enough to send shockwaves through political circles. But no one reacted more dramatically than the man at the center of it all, Donald J. Trump. Sources close to the former president say that he had been watching the broadcast at his Mar-a-Lago estate, surrounded by a small group of advisors. At first, he reportedly leaned forward in his seat, thinking it was just another jab from a political rival. But as Crockett calmly read from the documents, page by page, and mentioned dates, legal phrases, and the specific language from what appeared to be a confidential agreement, Trump's demeanor shifted rapidly. He jumped up and shouted, "She's lying," one insider shared. He grabbed the remote and rewound the segment. Then he stormed into the hallway and started barking orders, asking who let this get out. But according to those who were present, there was something deeper than just anger. It was panic. The former president is known for his fiery reactions. But this moment was different. It wasn't just a political attack. It was personal, deeply personal. And more importantly, it was backed by something more dangerous than opinion: documentation. Advisors scrambled to control the situation. Phones started ringing, attorneys were contacted, and a statement was hastily drafted. But behind the scenes, Trump's fury wasn't just about embarrassment, it was about exposure. For someone who had spent years crafting his image as a strong, stable leader with a picture-perfect family, the unveiling of divorce proceedings during his presidency was a threat to the very foundation of his public persona. Later that day, a brief official statement from Trump's office attempted to discredit Crockett. It read, "These so-called documents are fabricated and politically motivated. President Trump and the First Lady remain united, and any suggestion otherwise is completely false and defamatory." But Crockett wasn't fazed. Appearing in a follow-up segment, she addressed the backlash directly, her expression calm and controlled. "I expected this reaction. When someone who has controlled the narrative for so long feels the control slipping, their first instinct is to attack," she said. "But here's the thing: truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be seen." She emphasized that the purpose of her reveal wasn't to shame anyone or weaponize personal issues, but to challenge the dangerous blending of personal secrecy and public authority. If you're using your marriage as a badge of moral authority, you can't hide the cracks in that badge when it suits you, she explained. Observers began to take note of something else as well: Trump's noticeable silence on one key point. He never outright denied that the papers existed. His team's language was carefully crafted, using terms like fabricated and defamatory, but stopping short of confirming or denying the legitimacy of the specific documents Crockett had displayed. Behind the scenes, legal experts began whispering among themselves. The wording in Trump's statement left just enough ambiguity to raise eyebrows. Some speculated that Trump might seek a court injunction to prevent further public exposure of the documents. Others believed that the papers, though possibly incomplete, might still be part of real legal discussions that were never meant to surface. As for Trump's inner circle, chaos brewed. Melania Trump reportedly remained out of sight, refusing to make any public statement. Sources close to her suggested she was shocked and blindsided by the public disclosure, and that she hadn't spoken to Trump about the documents in over a year. Meanwhile, political allies began to distance themselves cautiously, but noticeably. A few well-known conservative commentators shifted focus in their interviews, steering clear of defending Trump's family life and instead doubling down on policy talking points. Even those usually loyal to him grew quiet, uncertain about how much truth Crockett might still be holding. Jasmine Crockett's move, wasn't just a jab, it was a calculated strike at the very heart of Trump's carefully constructed legacy. And judging by his explosive reaction, it hit its mark. As the week unfolded, the former president appeared in fewer public settings, no press conferences, no public appearances. His usual confident bravado was notably absent. Crockett, on the other hand, continued her appearances with the same calm demeanor, stating, "I said what I said, and I showed what I had. Now it's up to the American people to decide what kind of leadership they want." Trump's reaction showed more than anger, it showed vulnerability. And in politics, especially for someone who built an empire on the illusion of invincibility, vulnerability is the one thing you never want to let the world see. Asterisk. As Jasmine Crockett turned to the next section of the documents, the atmosphere shifted yet again. What had already been a bombshell moment was about to get even more unsettling, because this time, the focus wasn't on Trump himself, but on the one person who had rarely spoken publicly about their life inside the White House, Melania Trump. "This page," Crockett said calmly, holding it up so the camera could catch a brief glimpse of the header, "details something called a post-marital communication agreement, but I call it the Melania Clause." There was a pause, not for dramatic effect, but because the weight of what she had just introduced was already beginning to sink in. In short, the Melania Clause appeared to be a heavily restrictive legal condition within the proposed divorce filings. The language, as Crockett summarized it, was designed to limit Melania's ability to speak openly about her marriage, the Trump family, or any events that occurred during her time as First Lady. Even after a separation or divorce, the clause includes specific references to interviews, memoirs, public speeches, and even private conversations with certain individuals, Crockett explained. "It's the kind of document that tells you one thing very clearly. Someone doesn't want the truth getting out." What made this clause so unsettling wasn't just the level of detail. It was the tone of control it seemed to imply. According to the document, Melania would be forbidden from discussing her husband's business dealings, personal habits, private conversations, and interactions within the White House. The clause even specified that if she were to breach this agreement, financial penalties would be enforced, potentially in the millions. "This isn't a simple privacy agreement," Crockett noted. "This is a blueprint for silencing someone. It's a muzzle, not a contract." She went on to make it clear that she wasn't attacking Melania personally. In fact, she expressed a degree of sympathy. "If this clause is real and based on the document trail I've seen, I believe it is, then we need to be asking ourselves a serious question. What kind of power dynamic existed in that marriage that required this level of legal silence?" The Melania Clause was more than just a legal detail, it was a symbol of something. Crockett had long spoken out against the quiet suppression of women's voices, particularly in spaces dominated by wealth and power. She took this moment, not just to criticize the clause, but to launch into a larger point, one that transcended the Trump family. How many women are silenced every day because someone else has more power, more money, or more connections? She asked. How many NDA letters are signed not because women want privacy, but because they feel they have no choice? The room was quiet once more. No one dared interrupt her. She continued, "We talk a lot about leadership in this country, but real leadership doesn't come from intimidation. It comes from allowing truth to exist even if that truth is inconvenient." Legal experts who viewed the segment later described the clause as intensely restrictive, with one calling it the most comprehensive post-marital gag agreement they had ever seen drafted, outside of a celebrity scandal. Some speculated that the clause may have been designed as a preemptive move, not just to protect Trump's image, but to insulate him from any future revelations that might emerge from a potential book deal, media interview, or even a court testimony. The clause also raised questions about what Melania may have witnessed or experienced during her time as First Lady. What is someone trying to hide? Crockett asked. If they're this afraid of someone else speaking freely, she didn't make wild claims. She didn't accuse Melania of being a victim or suggest there was abuse. But she raised the right questions carefully, responsibly, and in a way that invited reflection rather than outrage. This clause isn't just about Donald Trump, she concluded. It's about every powerful figure who has ever used money and influence to erase someone else's voice. Then, she quietly slid the document back into the envelope. By the time she finished, the discussion had moved far beyond politics. Crockett had turned what could have been a mere scandal into a larger conversation about personal freedom, control, and the hidden cost of public life, especially for women who stand next to powerful men. The Melania Clause may never appear in full to the public. It may never be confirmed in court, but its very existence, even as a draft, raised one chilling possibility, that even within the walls of the highest office in the land, silence could be bought, enforced, and buried unless someone was brave enough to speak out. When the live segment ended, the cameras faded to black and the stage lights dimmed. The ripple effect of what Jasmine Crockett had just done continued to grow quietly, but unmistakably. She didn't storm out. She didn't linger for applause. With calm precision, she gathered the now infamous envelope, gave the host a respectful nod, and exited the studio with the same steady resolve that had defined her every word. But the aftermath was just beginning. In the hours that followed, conversations inside political circles began shifting. Behind closed doors, staffers and advisors scrambled to assess the damage. Supporters of Donald Trump found themselves in unfamiliar territory, no longer simply defending a man against political attacks, but now confronting personal revelations that could not be so easily dismissed. The questions weren't just about optics anymore, they were about authenticity, control, and character. Trump's legal team moved swiftly, sending strongly worded letters to media outlets and networks. Yet even with their aggressive tone, the team stopped short of offering any detailed refutation of the documents Crockett had displayed. They demanded retractions but didn't address the precise points Crockett had raised, particularly not the so-called Melania Clause or the proposed timeline of the divorce discussions. This silence, this refusal to directly address the contents, only fueled more curiosity. But Jasmine Crockett didn't wade into the frenzy. Instead, she issued a short but pointed public statement. My duty is not to protect comfort. It is to speak truth. And when that truth intersects with leadership, it is no longer personal, it becomes a matter of public trust. She didn't offer further appearances. She didn't seek to capitalize on the attention. That, in itself, became part of the story. Crockett wasn't just making a moment, she was making a point. In the days that followed, political analysts and commentators began to reflect on what had happened. It wasn't just that she had revealed confidential papers. It was how she had done it with precision, with purpose, and with a tone that demanded reflection, not rage. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't accused. She had simply laid bare what few dared to touch. One senior advisor, speaking under condition of anonymity, noted, Crockett didn't just expose Trump, she exposed the machinery around him. The image, the control, the fear of what happens when someone else holds the mic. The larger message began to sink in. This was never only about a potential divorce. It was about transparency. It was about the responsibility that comes with power. And most importantly, it was about who gets to tell the story. The story also had a personal resonance that hit home for many viewers, particularly women. The idea that someone in Melania's position could be subject to such strict silence, to such tightly controlled legal agreements, made people reconsider what it means to live in the shadow of influence. It reminded people that behind every powerful man, there may be stories untold, not because they're not important, but because they've been locked away. For Crockett, the message wasn't to destroy anyone, it was to shed light. In a follow-up conversation days later, she said, I've seen people lose their voice in relationships, in politics, in business. They're told to stay quiet for the sake of appearances. But silence is never strength. Speaking truth even when it's inconvenient is the foundation of integrity. That sentiment was echoed by many. Even those who didn't align with Crockett politically found themselves respecting the way she carried the moment. She didn't use it as a weapon. She used it as a mirror dot in the end. The fallout didn't just hit Trump, it cast a long shadow over a political culture that thrives on image while hiding the truth. Crockett's move opened a conversation that couldn't be neatly tucked away, because it wasn't about scandal. It was about standards. And as for the documents, whether or not they would lead to formal legal consequences remained unknown. But their existence had already done something more powerful. They forced the public to question the stories they had been sold, not just about a marriage, but about what leadership should look like. Jasmine Crockett closed her final statement with the kind of line that sticks with people long after the headlines fade. Leadership is not about perfection. It's about accountability. If someone can't be honest in their own home, how can we trust them to be honest in ours? With that, she stepped away, not for drama, but with dignity. And in doing so, she left behind a message far louder than the papers themselves. Truth doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs a voice willing to speak it.